Again, back to Zephaniah chapter 1 and verse 16, the prophet described the arrival of the day of the Lord as a day of trumpet and battle cry. And then beginning in verse 17, he says, "And I will bring distress on men so that they will walk like the blind because they have sinned against the Lord, and their blood will be poured out like dust and their flesh like dung. Neither their silver nor their gold will be able to deliver them on that day of the Lord's wrath. And all the earth will be devoured in the fire of his jealousy, for he will make a complete end, indeed a terrifying one of all the inhabitants of the earth." And as the angels stand ready to execute the command, John is shown another fascinating scene in verse 3. "And another angel came and stood at the altar, holding a golden censer. And much incense was given to him, that he might add it to the prayers of all the saints upon the golden altar which was before the throne." Where we read, "and another angel," we understand the Greek word is allos, which means another of the same kind. So this is another angel like the angel that we saw in verse 2. The imagery here is rooted in the Old Testament tabernacle and the temple of Israel. The altar of incense stood nearest to the Holy of Holies, in which the Shekinah, that glorious light of God's presence, would hover and was housed. Now, in the celestial court in heaven, as we read here, it is likewise situated nearest to the presence of God. The text tells us, before the throne. This was also the altar in Isaiah's vision in Isaiah 6, as well as Ezekiel's vision in Ezekiel 10. We read here of a golden censer. This was literally a fire pan in the Old Testament. And here we see that it's held by an angel. And this finds its parallel as well in the duties of the Old Testament priests, where every morning and every evening he would place red-hot, fiery coals from the brazen altar, which was that altar where sacrifices were offered. And he would place these coals in this golden censer. And then he would transfer the coals to the altar of incense, where he would pour the coals onto the altar. And then the smoke from the ignited incense would rise heavenward, symbolizing the prayers of the Israelites, who would during this time be assembled together in prayer, watching that fragrant cloud of smoke ascend symbolically, carrying their prayers unto God. Now notice here in verse 3, we see that much incense was given to him. No doubt it was given to him by God, since this verb in the Greek form, frequently refers to something given by God in the book of Revelation. So much incense was given to him that he might add it to the prayers of all the saints. Now this would signify God's affirmation of the prayers of vengeance and justice being offered by these martyred saints that we read about first in chapter 6, verses 9 through 11. Now, dear Christian, please hear me. There's a great lesson to be learned here. All of the prayers for God to avenge himself, for his justice to prevail, for his justice to be executed, will one day be answered, but only in God's timing. When all of his purposes are accomplished, he will act for his glory. And here we witness that time when he finally acts in vengeance in answer to the prayers of the martyred saints, prayers which he himself adds additional incense of acceptance and therefore the guarantee to execute judgment. Notice next in verse 4, "And the smoke of the incense with the prayers of the saints went up before God out of the angel's hand." You will remember in chapter 6 and verse 10, the martyred saints cried out to the Lord, "How long, O Lord, holy and true, wilt thou refrain from judging and avenging our blood on those who dwell on the earth?" Well, friends, here we see their prayers are about to be answered. And this moves us, thirdly, to the signal of avenging wrath. As the 30-minute calm before the storm is violently interrupted, we read in verse 5, "And the angel took the censer, and he filled it with the fire of the altar, and he threw it to the earth. And there followed peals of thunder and sounds and flashes of lightning and an earthquake. And the 7 angels who had the 7 trumpets prepared themselves to sound them." This is a breathtaking scene. Suddenly, in response to the divine command, in a miraculous act of supernatural fury, the angel takes the censer that symbolizes the prayers of the saints. He fills it with fire from the altar and thus transforms those prayers into a firestorm of divine wrath and hurls it to the earth. What a vivid picture of answered prayer. The supersonic force of this act results in, quote, "peals of thunder and sounds and flashes of lightning and an earthquake." Now think about it. The persecutors of the tribulation saints have by now crawled out from their caves and their fortresses, thinking that perhaps the worst of it all is over, that the wrath of the Lamb has finally been exhausted. And then suddenly they discover that more is to come. And frankly, only those who have studied the prophetic word will have any idea of the destruction that awaits them. Now, this particular event will signal the sequential judgments released at the sounding of the 7 trumpets, followed by the pouring of the 7 bowls, all of which telescope from the 7th seal judgment. And these first 4 judgments will release plagues that will target the natural objects of the earth's ecosystems, unlike the last 3 plagues that will unleash a demonic onslaught that will target human beings specifically. And I want you to remember that God is not only judging those who reject the Lord Jesus Christ among the Gentile nations, but also the Jews. Remember that He has preserved 144,000, 12,000 from each of the tribes of Israel as His evangelists, and they are being used to reconcile a remnant of the nation of Israel, those ethnic Jews, the descendants of Abraham. And I want you to remember, again, that this is Daniel's 70th week, this time of tribulation, the 7-year period. These are pre-kingdom judgments for Israel's long-awaited kingdom. The church is no longer in the picture. Daniel 9, verse 24 says, 70 weeks have been decreed for your people and your holy city to finish the transgression, to make an end of sin, to make atonement for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy place. And it's for this reason the pre-kingdom judgments that unfold here are reminiscent of the first time God established a mediatorial kingdom upon the earth in the wilderness of Sinai with Moses, the divinely authorized mediatorial ruler of the historical kingdom, and the children of Israel as the chosen nation. In Exodus 19:6, we read that God chose Moses, and He said to Moses that they were to be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. I want to remind you of something that's very important here. Prior to the establishment of the theocratic kingdom, God poured out His wrath upon the Gentiles of Egypt and the surrounding nations. And He did this in the form of 10 plagues and the Red Sea judgment that destroyed Pharaoh's army. And those miraculous events proved to the Egyptians and to the world the absolute sovereignty of Jehovah over all of the alleged gods.